Welcome back to the Detroit is Different podcast and the Detroit is Different studio. And the guest I have today is none other than the very first guest. So when I started my podcast journey, he started the podcast journey with me, actually. And it actually is still one of the most listened to Detroit is Different podcasts. So if you go back in the archives, this is pre-video, right? This is actually when the podcast was recorded without a podcast studio. This was at a Petit Zinc restaurant. So if you know your Detroit is Different history, you know my first guest. And it's actually one of the best first guests ever. And it's the 10-year anniversary of Detroit is Different. So we've been talking about this all year as so much has been happening with one of my OGs or mentors, someone I look up to in so many things in life, in building, and community. Baba Malik Yakini, how are you today?
Whoop, 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 whoop.
Yes,
Great.
sir.
I'm
Yes,
great.
sir.
I'm doing great, man.
And you've actually probably like my most seen again guest as well. We've had some interesting moments on here.
We have.
Yeah, man.
To my capitalism last time I was on here.
We've talked about capitalism, African Center Schools,
All of that.
reggae. Actually, for a while, making medallions was a hell of a revenue stream for not just Baba Malik, but many other brothers. But Baba Malik had it down. Like, it was moving like everything in the streets.
Baba Kafense,
Yeah.
Baba Abdul Rahim, Baba Hakim. It was several of us.
I know. Yeah,
We was
man.
flipping the medallions.
Yeah, flipping medallions was a revenue stream holding down a family. See, that's back to brothers' ingenuity connected when hip hop was more in consciousness. And then Death Row happened and it was like, nah, we ain't checking for the
It was a wrap.
consciousness.
It was
Yeah,
a wrap.
It was 40 ounces in chronic
Out with all that
consciousness. Black enlightenment.
public enemy and all that X-Clan stuff.
Yes.
Let's get rid of all that stuff.
Brand Nubian, none of that.
Right, none of that no more.
Yeah, it was gangsterism.
Yep.
It went from brothers making medallions to who knows who makes bandanas, but bandana sales probably just went up.
Lord have mercy.
Traded in a medallion for a bandana. Ain't that something?
Here we are.
Yeah. And 10 years later, Detroit is different. So with this, as you said, what are we going to talk about? It's so many things to talk about, but always the first thing is everybody at our last interview, it was like, what's going to happen with Baba Malik? What's going to happen with Baba Malik? I know a little bit, but you all going to learn a whole lot more. What he's willing to share. But Baba Malik, we've seen the opening of the co-op over the years where it's a space and place. You representing the co-op, Detroit Black Food Security Community. Detroit Black Community
Food Sovereignty
Network.
That's right.
D-Town Farms. It's grown to like an organization with so many more people connecting to it. Now, like the classes, I was just checking it out, leaving one day, and it's like, okay, it's food classes in here, it's prep. People needed a kitchen. It's an open space named in honor of Mama Imani Humphrey, where banquets and just like so many cultural events are happening. A vision that has come to life of so many people in a collective. Let's start there. How does it feel just seeing this manifest?
It feels great seeing the Detroit Food Commons open, which is the name of the building. We just opened on May 1st on the corner of Woodward and Euclid.
Yep.
And of course, the highlight of it is the Detroit People's Food Co-op, the community-owned grocery store, Black-led community-owned grocery store.
Yeah.
And then, as you mentioned, on the second floor, we have the Coochie Chaglia Kitchens, the Mama Imani Humphrey Hall, and the offices of DBCFSN. So it is the realization of I wouldn't say a dream, the realization of a vision and of 14 years of work behind that vision to make it come into being.
So a space, and this is something that my dad often presents to me with some of the work with Detroit is Different. What makes the space, as opposed to like conceptual and abstract and people just gathering using other space, what do you think connects our people to actually being in the space differently?
I think people perceive the space differently, for one thing, because the space is the result of, again, 14 years of work, primarily by the Detroit Black Community Food Sovereignty Network and also by member owners of the Detroit People's Food Co-op. And the community has watched that 14-year journey. And so there's a tremendous amount of community ownership. Whether people actually own it or not, whether they're member owners of the co-op or not, the community feels like it's theirs. And so We experienced this on opening day. In fact, I have video of the what was supposed to be the soft opening on May the 1st,
Mhm.
and it was one of the most incredible things I've ever seen in my 50 years of organizing. Somehow we tapped into something the community was ready for, and the sentiment expressed as people poured through the doors on opening day really confirmed that. So, so again, people watched and witnessed and participated in this 14-year build to getting to May 1st of this year when we opened the doors. And as a result of that, again, there's this tremendous identification by many members of the community with that space.
And I'm gonna say something that's a old adage, as they say, being a part of something bigger than themselves.
Yeah, many people are tremendously proud of this accomplishment. Even, there were lots of naysayers out here.
Mhm.
Let's be real about it. There were people out here saying I was stealing the money, that I pocketed $500,000.
Mm.
There were people saying that this was a scam and it never would open.
Oh,
And
man.
and so first, when we started construction, that put most of that chatter to rest. But then when we opened the doors, it definitely put all that chatter to rest. And
Mhm.
many of those people who were involved in that chatter are now in the store, embracing me,
That's
talking about
hilarious.
what a great thing it is. But that's because most of us don't see with our third eye. We're not visionaries. We have to see what actually manifests in the physical world. And so, when it was just in the idea stage, many people couldn't really see it. But once it happened, it's undeniable.
And over that 14 years, as someone that definitely sits in that ideation and the processing and that third eye stage, the visionary of what Detroit is different is. And thank you so much. We're gonna talk a little bit about that later too, of helping me with that. I think that that's so wonderful because I remember, rest in peace, Mama Charity and so many people that have poured into this. Mama Hanifa, like, so I see so many people's faces of how this is organized. Rest in peace, my godmother, Joanne Watson. I remember taking the pictures at the groundbreaking. And then we had our team, like as my team's grown, Demarie taking the pictures at the May 1st. And then the actual opening, I'm there with the crew taking pictures. So like seeing each step of the way of just what's happening right there on Euclid and Woodward in the North End, that's been something that was powerful, especially the grand opening, seeing the different people there. And I'm sure some of those people were the like, where did all the money go, brother? I'm sure. And I know that we're not gonna even talk so much about who that was,
Right.
but more so just understanding just that's gonna happen when we organize.
That's part of the territory. So even though, like I said, it were naysayers, there was
Mhm.
a tremendous sense of identification with the victory that people saw when we opened that.
Yeah.
And so people are inspired. In fact, I've heard several people to say that this is one of the most significant things that's happened for Black people in the last 50 years in the city of Detroit.
I would concur, most definitely. I would put that there. Um, at the grand opening, I was taking the shots. Sonia Mays was off to the side, and when she gave her remarks at the grand opening, please check those remarks. It's more formal and everything, and then after I took a couple shots and I showed her the shots and I really wanted to ask her, I was like, "So, what committed you to the vision of something like this?" Because it takes people with different relationships, different networks, different resources to, um, execute where their skills and their talents fit best. And her joining in and seeing this through, from her lens.
Mhm.
And what she said was, it just did not make sense that it couldn't happen to her.
Mm.
And from my lens of a lot of thinking of, okay, I know where the structure is. I know what America is. I mean, how could you not see that? And I know I'm paraphrasing a lot into this, but it was just from her lens, it needs to happen and it can happen. And it's just 2 plus 2 equals 4. And oftentimes, maybe my jaded view or glass, I guess this is full, but I still think it may be half full
Mhm.
lens of Black America is like, oh, that's half full. So her attitude was different. And many other people had a different attitude. What do you think over these 14 years has connected so many of the different people's personalities, and approaches to having that vision and buying in, knowing that everybody plays a different position in the collective victory.
So I think what happens with a project like this is everybody's kind of hedging their bets. So DBCFSN came out with this idea 2010 and started kind of spreading it in the community and organizing people around it. And so, of course, in the initial stages, it's just an idea, just some people who sat around a table and came up with something they want to see happen in the future. And so, initially, very few people can identify with that because it's not tangible yet. Um, So as we continue to build though, and as we stayed focused and we never wavered on the objectives of it, we never wavered on the vision of it, what began to happen is we began to attract other people to the team that we needed to make this come into fruition. And clearly Sonia Mays and Develop Detroit were key components in making this happen. And so I think what happened is they saw enough of the elements were in place for this to be successful. So it's kind of like, and I don't know if I've used this analogy before, but when I was a youngster, we used to go to parties in people's basements,
Mhm.
and there'd be car table chairs set up around the perimeter, and everybody just be sitting around, maybe listen to the music, maybe eating or something, until somebody finally got up to dance. And when that person got up to dance, it kind of signaled to the rest of the people, okay, cool, the party's on, let's get up and dance. So a development deal like the Detroit Food Commons is kinda like that also. People are waiting to see who's gonna get up and dance, and then when they see enough people are dancing, they feel like it's safe for them to dance too. And so we had to get people up on the dance floor, using this analogy, and I think Sonia May saw enough people on the dance floor that the party could be successful. Financiers saw enough people on the dance floor that it could be successful. The city uh, uh, planning department saw enough people on the dance floor. And so the reality is everybody wants to be part of a success. And when people started seeing the elements were galvanizing in order to make this project a success, it was easier and easier to get people on board.
So in that, you spoke about the idea at the beginning, and you have so much experience in the world of organizing. And organizing starts in ideation. And you're one of the number one people that always says, I'm so sick of so much of the talking, so much of the talking, so much of the talking. Can you share where you now have learned to differentiate the talking that you've spoken to sometimes from ideation?
Differentiate the talking from the ideation. Well, I mean, talking in and of itself is not bad. The thing is, the talking has to be guided by an intention to make the talking actually manifest in something in the world which makes conditions better for our people. If we're just talking to hear our own voice or talking for ego's sake, then it doesn't do much good. So I think the ideation can be embedded in the talking and can be used as a way of motivating people to get involved in the ideas. But I think the most important thing is the actual work that takes place. Our people Most people don't see again with their third eye, they're seeing with their physical eyes. And so you have to put a physical representation in front of them for them to see it. Then it's like, oh, yeah, now I see what you're talking about. As opposed to putting kind of a far off idea. Some people can attach to the far off idea and can see that. But the average person, they're looking at kind of what's in front of their face. And so this is really an organizing principle I learned way back in the 70s from Haki Matabuti. He said, our people are still Cadillac buyers. And what he meant by that is that we have to attract people to what we're doing by having it be top quality. We don't want no shoddy stuff. We want stuff to look good, to be good. And so, so that's kind of how we proceed. We show and prove, and then that's how you win people over because many people aren't just can't see the idea before it manifests.
Mm, yeah. So I love that you shared that. And with that, what are some of your skills over the time in being at that table when ideas are being created? What have you found to be some of the most useful or resourceful ways of approaching that?
I would say the first thing is having a clear sense of your own values. And when I say your own, I wasn't approaching this as an individual. I was representing Detroit Black Community Food Sovereignty Network. So I had to have a clear and profound understanding of what values the organization stands on and what I'm representing when I'm at a table. So I know what things are compromisable and what things are immutable. What things am I willing to stand and die for, and what things can we make compromises on? And so that's necessary whenever you do a deal like this, where there's millions of dollars involved. There's everybody's playing this side of the chessboard. Everybody's trying to kind of move the deal more to their advantage and things like that. And so you have to know where you stand and what you're standing for. And you have to be willing on some things to say, well, if this doesn't go down, I'm pulling the plug. And there were a couple things like that. I don't want to get into the details of that,
Yeah.
but there were, sometimes
Mhm.
when stances had to be taken that could have possibly jeopardized the project. So that's the first thing, having a clear vision and clear values that you stand on. The other thing I think that one of the skills perhaps I already had and I have refined through this process is the ability to relate to people on various different levels and representing various different viewpoints. Because a project like this takes pulling a team together, not only of activists or people who see the vision of creating a more circular economy, but you got to have people who are architects,
Yeah.
because you're an activist don't know doesn't mean you know how to design a building. I certainly don't.
Yeah.
You got to have construction professionals at the table.
You should definitely.
You have to have engineers at the table. You have to have city departments at the table because there's many permits and licenses involved in getting to the finish line. You have to have attorneys at the table. You have to have accountants at the table. And sometimes, like for a deal like this, and it was a $22.6 million deal building the Detroit Food Commons, um, we had to have, well, the majority of that funding came from what's called New Markets Tax Credits, a federal lending instrument where basically the you only pay the interest for the first 7 years, and then you start paying the principal on the loan after 7 years. And so the idea is a business should be able to get up and running, be profitable by 7 years, then you can afford to actually pay the loan back. So it's a tool to spur development in urban areas that have been disinvested. So, um, the new market tax credits require a separate accountant just for that, and we had to have a separate attorney just for that. So the point is that there's this huge team of people, and that's kind of the development team. But then also you have to have a team of people in the community, organizing people, uh, educating people about what food cooperatives are, signing people to get up and join. You have to be coordinating the volunteers, coordinating the member owners who are on these various committees. So I think one of the skills I developed or I refined was the ability to talk to varied people with varying perspectives, varying interests, and get them on the same page, at least same page enough to make this deal go through.
So with that, that definitely would take you out of something that we naturally love to be in. That takes you out of your comfort zone because naturally some of the people that you're going to talk to will see the world differently.
I don't know if I would say it takes me out of my comfort zone though,
It wouldn't? Okay.
because I'm comfortable in every situation I'm in, wherever
Okay.
I'm at on the planet,
Okay.
and I don't care if I'm talking to a corporate president or if
Mhm.
I'm talking to the brother who lives on the corner of the street. I'm gonna show up as the same person, and so I'm comfortable wherever I am, and I've learned how to present kind of these arguments that drive our work in a way that any reasonable person couldn't disagree with it. And so that ability I think is able to bring people in, but I'm not out of my comfort zone because I'm talking to people who are in the corporate world or whatever.
Which actually, I think that you're phenomenal with that. And even you responding to that question naturally goes into like, why this is one of my big homies. And I think some of that skill set and talent was developed when you were an instructor and teacher, because I assume little homies will come at you with God knows what, in your teaching journey and just knowing how to get messaging across to so many different types of people.
Right.
And definitely the younger a person is, the attention span becomes shorter. So delivering a succinct message that is understood is impactful. As you just broke down new market credits, I think masterfully, and that's a huge economic concept.
Well, I didn't I just touched on the surface of it. It's a very complex
Oh, you did.
tool, and
But
so
just the introduction
yeah.
alone was, um, as I sometimes look at a lot of people in the planning division of our city that could not even give the introduction in
Right,
such
right.
a
But, I think
understandable way.
the key is to be confident within yourself, and if you know where you stand, you can deal with any other human being on the planet,
Mm,
eyeball to eyeball, shoulder to shoulder. So that's how I deal with life.
mhm.
I know where I stand. Nobody else pulls me off of my center because they're somewhere else. I'm still on my center wherever you are, and so I'm comfortable in any situation, frankly.
So, in the growth of this over the 14 years of the store, but this actually starts even before that idea comes to life.
Sure.
What the co-op and the people and just your journey in this, I would say over time, and life presents itself when it presents itself, and being prepared and ready at the same time is advantageous. But where do you stand now versus like in your mindset, in your preparation, versus if this were to have happened 14 years ago for you?
Well, clearly, I've grown in 14 years,
Hmm.
and hopefully grown in many ways. Grown in emotional maturity. Certainly, I've grown in my understanding of the political economy and how that impacts the city of Detroit and the context that we're operating within. I've grown in my understanding of patriarchy. And so hopefully I'm showing up as a more whole, more complete human being, and that enables me to relate to people in a more just and equitable way. And that helps to kind of build the teams that are necessary to move this kind of work forward.
Okay. Which now I guess more practical. D-Town Farms, another huge victory for the community. One could make the argument that that's another one of the most impactful uh, events, spaces, and places for Black people for the city of Detroit. Do you think that some of the organizing for D-Town Farms and the lessons learned there have impacted some of the lessons in the development of Food Commons?
For sure. I mean, it's a continuum. And let me say this because I didn't say this before for your listeners and viewers. June 1st, I stepped down as executive director of Detroit Black Community Food Sovereignty Network.
Mhm.
It is now led by two brilliant Black women, Dr. Shakira Tyler and Gianna Cheers. So I want people to be clear that as I'm talking, I'm not talking as the leadership of the organization at this point.
Yes.
I'm talking more in a historical retrospective sense.
Mhm.
But yeah, D-Town Farm we think was and is very significant. D-Town Farm is a 7-acre farm in Rouge Park. It's one of the largest farms in Detroit. We used to be able to say it's the largest, but there is now a farm, Pingree Farm, on the east side of Detroit that I'm told has more land in total than D-Town Farm, but it's not all contiguous.
Mm.
But the point is not who's the biggest. That's not the point. The point is that we created a farm that is specifically geared towards training Black people in the basics of urban agriculture and also of raising the consciousness of our community about the importance of producing our own food. And it does several other things also. It challenges people in the city to think about how land can be used, how underutilized and unutilized land in the city, to think of innovative ways that it can be used that are more in tune with nature instead of only thinking about putting up parking structures and concrete and things like that. But there were, many lessons in organizing. Well, D-Town Farm is part of this larger organization, Detroit Black Community Food Sovereignty Network. And so in organizing D-Town Farm, the Food Warriors Youth Development Program, the What's for Dinner lecture series, the um um
Food Commons.
the food commons, the food and flavors, what I was trying to think of, our
Mhm.
youth program for high school students. In organizing all these things, we've learned tremendous lessons about how you go about organizing both the 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 out-facing organizing. How do you organize the community? But we've learned a lot about also how do you organize internally,
Mm.
right? Because you have to have organization within the organization to get things done. You have to have processes and policies. And so we've learned all of that, over the last really 18 years now. We started DBCFSN in 2006.
Mhm.
And so all of those experiences, including the experience of organizing D-Town Farm, better equipped us to have the capacity to lead the Detroit Food Commons development.
Yeah, because also in that idea of third eye and what comes together, I believe that, sometimes the process, and that's where I appreciate this interview so much because these are questions about the process, of moving to that because so much creativity, I think, in our community is wonderful and beautiful, but pouring into the process and getting there and staying committed and learning each step,
Yes.
that's where that commitment, as often people say, the most successful person in business is who makes the most money. Not what I say, not what my grandfather taught or my father taught as entrepreneurs. It's who can stay in the longest
Mm,
because it's having the process
mhm.
that goes.
Right.
So a person can look at, the business that lasts the longest versus the business that, may have a bump here and then fizzle out, bump here, fizzle out versus a person that can kind of stay steady.
Two thoughts about that. One, over this 14-year process, what you're saying definitely applies. That we had to have the ability to stay in the game all those
Mhm.
14 years.
Yes.
And part of that is cash flow because all that time you paying consultants, you paying architects, and you got to keep them paid. And so that means you got to keep some money flowing. And I can tell you it wasn't always easy. December of 2019,
Mhm.
DBCFSN was in dire financial straits to where we were borrowing money from different comrades around the city to make payroll and what have you. So it wasn't easy, but we had to
Keep it going.
keep it going. And sometimes what knocks black folks out of the game is we don't have the wherewithal to stay in the game for the long term.
Yeah.
And so we had to stay in this game for 14 years in order to get it to the finish line. The second thought that you raised, the second thought that your comment raised is that now that we've opened the Detroit People's Food Co-op, that's a huge victory. But also now the real struggle is, can we make it sustainable? Will it
Yeah.
be here in 10 years? Will it be here in 20 years? Will it be in 30 years? And so we have to put the expertise of the grocery business in place. We have to have an acute expertise in that area. Then also we have to keep our finger on the pulse of the community and make sure that we're doing ongoing community organizing. Just because we open the store doesn't mean that the efforts to recruit new member owners and to educate people about food co-ops ends. In fact, we have to step up those efforts now.
Yeah, definitely. And you have experience over time with school and even with the medallions. And it's interesting how I've even learned experiences here become applicable there,
Sure,
especially when it's dealing with our people,
sure.
because so many waves can come. And then just the realism of over 14 years, people travel. Sadly, some people pass on. Um, other careers and other ambitions change over, and new people have to present themselves.
Right. This is a really important point, and I've been thinking a lot about that. That one of the reasons we need institutions is because institutions usually survive, they outlive individuals.
Yes.
And so often we're building our capacity in our community around individuals. And if that individual either becomes sick or dies or whatever, then the whole thing collapses. And so we have to be able to build people's institutions that are beyond any one or two individuals. And so DBCFSN has had a number of deaths in this 14-year period. Key people within the organization. You mentioned Charity Hicks,
Yeah.
who was a founder of DBCFSN, a co-founder, and at one point served as the secretary and served as the lead along with myself in creating the Detroit Food Policy Council. She was involved in the early stages of the co-op as well. She passed. Our farm manager, Kadiri Senefara, who was also
Jeez.
involved in the creation of the co-op and involved in the Food Warriors Youth Development Program and managed the D-Town Farm. He passed.
Hell of a MC too.
His mentor or Jegna, Mama Jackie Hunt,
Mm.
who introduced Kadiri to agriculture and was a member of DBCFSN and the first assistant farm manager.
Mm,
She passed.
mm,
Our good brother Kalinda E., who was a co-founder of DBCFSN, and the mycologist who raised mushrooms at the farm, he passed in 2020. So there's a number of people who have passed, but still, in spite of that, we've been able to keep the institution intact and keep it
mhm.
moving forward. And now, with me having stepped down, this is another transition, and part of it is intentional to make sure that the organization has sustainability beyond my presence as an individual. So that's part of why I stepped down, because having an organization too closely identified with any one individual really is a weakness. And so, me stepping away, turning over the reins to new leadership, but still staying in constant contact with that leadership and advising them, helping them through bumps in the road is a way of, again, passing the baton and assuring the longevity and sustainability of the organization.
Yeah, so many people, like, even one of the times when I spoke with you, and you were shocked that people were like, "Baba Malik not retiring and everything," and I'm like, "I'm learning from the OG. I'm learning that at certain points, it's better in the transition at this point when a new beginning presents itself for a transition to happen." I was, and you never explicitly said this, but I pulled that apple from the tree of my own thought process and insight that this is the best time versus a time where if you were to be there for 5 years, then people will say, like, just whatever, you know what I'm saying? The apples were better when Bob Malik was here, you know what I'm saying? Just
But,
people are interesting.
the reality is, and I experienced this when I stepped down from Minnesota Institute also,
Yeah.
when you have a person who's been in long-term leadership in an organization, there's going to be whoever follows them is going to have a hard time, frankly.
Yeah.
And people are going to say, yeah, the apples were sweeter when he was here,
Yeah.
whatever. That's part of what goes with the territory.
Yep.
Um, but ideally, um, the plan wasn't initially really for me to step down a month after we opened the building.
Mm.
But because of delays in construction and because of me being firm in the date that I was out, because I kept changing that date. I've been trying to retire for about 5 years, but we were trying to finish this building, and I couldn't retire until we got that to completion. And so, because of financial delays, construction delays, that date got pushed back and pushed back and pushed
As
back.
you say, 14 years.
Well, the date didn't get pushed
Well,
back
I
to
know,
14.
but I'm
The
saying, but the
process.
process took
Right. That's
14
right.
years.
That's right.
So in the beginning, when you draw that up, and this is me just in my ideas. Like when
Yeah.
people see me do a budget,
Yeah.
I usually multiply it by 1.33 because I think it's going to be 33% more. And hence, I'm also learning that it's probably going to take maybe about 33% to 40% more time as well. So, like, if I think I got a 9-year plan for it to take 14 years.
Yeah. Yeah. We do the same thing in farming when we're doing crop planning, when we're purchasing seeds, for example.
Mhm.
We always buy at least 20% more seeds because we
Yeah.
expect some of the seeds aren't going to germinate. So same kind of principle.
Yeah, and I mean, it's learned over time. It's not like, it's not like my dad told me this and it's like, "Oh, Imma just do what my dad said." It's like, "Oh, yeah, I'm I find myself in the hole." And then it's like, "Okay, borrowing that money, snatching this, snatching that to cover it. So now let me prepare myself better for when things are going to happen."
Mhm.
Within time and money, those are the resources in business
Mhm.
or organizing.
Mhm.
I speak into it more in business, but in organizing and getting those resources that matter, but it's also the social capital that plays a hell of a role too. And I think you've been also one of those key gateways in gathering a lot of social capital too.
Yes, one of the points I want to emphasize, I kind of said this a minute ago, but I want to go back
Bring
to
it
it.
back. Yeah.
And that is that I had to set some boundaries for myself. So, and younger people talk about boundaries a lot now,
True indeed.
which is a good thing. We need to have boundaries and not have people violating us and what have you. And I'll just say that although I was honored to do so, carrying that load of being the lead person on the Detroit Food Commons for so many years was a big lift. It was a heavy lift.
I can imagine.
And so part of what I've learned from younger people is this idea of self-care and pacing ourselves and trying to be around for the long term. And so I had to set a boundary for myself also, so that for my own well-being. And that happened to be, as things turned out, a month after the building opened. Ideally, in the best of worlds, maybe we would have opened the building. I would have been around for a year or so to help
Mhm.
make sure all the procedures were in place and all that. Then I would have stepped away. But That's not how things happen.
And you're from an era of a lot of people I've seen work put in a lot of daunting hours. You
Yeah.
know, um, Mommy Imani Humphrey. You
Yes.
know, I can't think of a day where, as I'm a Shule kid, where I did not see Mommy Imani Humphrey like almost like first there, first out. Because sometimes my mom would pick us up, yeah,
I might have shared this story with you before that one of the things that sticks in my mind about Mama Imani and Mama Inamoy Kafiri Hill is one day, the day before school opened, this is probably about 1981, 82, something like that.
yeah,
And the Shule had just moved into a building on Curtis near um, Schaefer. I think it was Curtis near Schaefer,
mm,
in a church. And so they were preparing the space to open school the next day. And I saw Mama Imani, Mama Inamoy down on their hands and knees painting lockers. There were no all the people that you see at Kwanzaa, Tama Umoja, Kujija, none of them people were around. It was just
yeah.
these two elder sisters on their hands and knees painting lockers, getting this institution ready to receive children the next day. So that lesson sticks with me always, that yes, that it's daunting. Yes, there's times that are going to be very difficult, but I've seen the example of institution builders like Mama Imani and Mama Inamoy, and the going above and beyond, is really what it takes to build and sustain these kind of institutions.
And I know that sticks in your mind, and I know that sticks even in my mind. As you're saying that, I remember a couple of days ago at the My Natural Hair show, and people were like, "You cleaning the bathroom?" I'm like, "Yeah, the event's gonna start, and I need to be editing something. Bathroom need to be cleaned up, so I'm in here with my one volunteer cleaning the bathroom because this bathroom, and I know this is an event with a lot of women. Like that's just in my mind of like I'm gonna do it." And it's interesting that that's in my mind, but also like that balance of self care. So I was just gonna ask, knowing that idea of that boundary, but also knowing so much that could be done, how did you find that balance or finding that balance? How are you finding it?
I'm glad you rephrased that to finding.
Yes, sir.
So I'll say that um, I've grown tremendously over the last 10, 12 years as a result of my interaction with younger activists. And
Mm,
I probably mentioned this on your show before, that the work ethic in the generation I came up in the movement was put your nose to the grindstone, keep it there 24/7, and if you let up, you're a Tom and a traitor to the people.
mm,
And so that's kind of the way we moved. And so we worked ourselves way over what we should have done. We minimize sometimes family responsibilities in order to get organizational work done. We sacrificed a lot of personal pleasure and things that make people a whole human being in order to get the work done. And then I started meeting these younger activists. And I remember in particular, I was in a fellowship and Adrienne Marie Brown was in it and another sister named Nikki Silvestri. And they were talking about going scuba diving and getting massages. And I was like, what? You can be a revolutionary and go scuba diving. You can be a revolutionary, get a massage. And so it kind of opened my head up. The younger people having this much more healthy approach
mhm.
to how we approach our movement really helped me to see things in a different way. And as I've matured in my thinking about this, and also as the movement has matured, there's been a number of people who have written about how capitalism measures our worth only by our productive capacity. And so, black men in particular, we have this really bad because our worth basically is determined by our productive capacity. Can we keep our
Yeah.
families fed? Can we keep the rent paid? And that means many times working incessantly. And so, I think I have a more healthy balance. I'm still working on this between the intense work and the self care than I had 10 years ago. But I will say this: that I think there's benefits to both sides, and there's potential deficits on both sides
It's the yin and yang and everything.
in everything. And so one of the benefits is that I've learned how to push through adversity. There's nothing that can stop. Once I've decided something's going, there's nothing that can stop it.
Mhm.
Period. And so I've learned how to have that kind of determination to move through any obstacle. And if that means staying up all night, if it means putting in the money out of my pocket, whatever it means, it's going to happen.
Mhm.
So I'm glad I have that ability, but you can't move through life every day in that way, in that kind of almost state of urgency.
Mhm.
And so the other side of it though is sometimes I see younger people. There's so much off into self care that for example, I had a friend who was running a farm in Portland, and he said every time police nationally would brutalize somebody, you know, one of the persons working at the farm said, "Well, I can't come to work today. I'm traumatized," or sometimes people, because they feel like maybe their chakras aren't spinning in the right direction or whatever, they can't function, and so sometimes I think the self care thing also can go to the extreme where people aren't willing to accept any adversity, and so I think the thing is again a healthy balance so that we're moving in a healthy, balanced way, but that when the time comes to move through adversity and to pick up the gauntlet and to make it happen, that we know how to do it, but then also we know how to relax, we know how to keep ourselves healthy, and we know how to kind of balance those two parts of our lives.
Yeah, jokingly, I wanna say, what was, like, that first day when you, spent a day at, like, a day spa or something? That was probably
Well, I haven't
hilarious.
been to a day spa yet, but but I will tell you this. In fact, today I went and got a massage. Today, yesterday.
Okay.
Um, so I had been going to a sister in the community,
Mhm.
and she had some medical problems herself and
Mm,
wasn't able to
mm.
continue doing the massage therapy for a while. And so during that time period, I tried to find somebody else, and I had heard about this place at Oakland Mall.
Uh-huh.
I think it's called Tai Chi or something massage. And so I went out there. I said, "Well, let me try this. Let me check it out." And so the first thing they had men and women. They had some big ass Chinese men in there,
Mhm.
and so I had to get past the phobia, to tell you the truth, of some big ass Chinese man putting his hand on my body.
Yeah, I'm definitely from that era as well, my friend.
Yeah, but once I grew past that,
Yeah.
it was like a great massage,
Okay.
so I go out there regularly. In fact, when I
Okay.
stepped down on June 1st, the Detroit People's Food Co-op gifted me 5 gift certificates for
Cool.
massages, so I've been using those, and
Okay.
I've used all of those up. Now I'm paying out of
Alright.
my pocket. But, just trying to be more conscious
Mhm.
of self-care, not just to feel better, but to extend my life and my productive capacity and my ability to continue to contribute to our people.
And the impact do you think that that's had on some personal relationships? Just in short, what impact do you think that's had on the friend's family?
Hmm. I don't know if I wanna talk about that too much. I'll just
Alright.
I'll just say this, that in life, I think I probably could have created a better balance between my community work and between my family work, and, that's a continuous kinda balancing act, because these things often require long hours and tremendous commitment, and, if we're not very careful, we can shortchange those people around us. So, I certainly haven't been perfect in creating that balance.
And, more so, let's talk friends. It was an interesting discussion we had at the naming ceremony, for Kofi's son, Dessalines, where you were just reflecting about so many of your homies that have passed as a black man in health and everything. What has that journey been like? And I often, like, think about my friendship and, it's my father too, but we walk and we talk and even looking up to you. What's it like? Because you just shared, over time, your friends, your homies. How has that grown? Some that have passed on. What's that been in that?
So, I wanna name some of those homies,
Yeah.
who are like my comrades that I walked with every day. Well, first is Kwame Kenyatta, as you know,
Rest in peace.
Brother Kalindi Iyi, Brother
Rest in peace.
Kamal Da'ajara,
Mm.
Dr. Keith Osei Dye, Brother Olu Chumbe Namtambu. Those are some of the ones I want to name who were very close to me. And so, a couple things I feel. One, I have a tremendous sense of gratitude that at 68 years old, I'm still here. I'm still in good health. I'm still in my right mind. I'm still able to contribute. Um, but I also um, realize the tenuousness of life. That this is a relatively short journey. Whether you get 50 years, 60, 70, 80, 90, or whatever, it's still a relatively short journey. And so, being at 68 and seeing I have way more years behind me than I have in front of me, it makes me much more conscious of how I spend my time.
Mm.
And so, time is much more valuable. So I don't have time to waste. For example, people ask me to go to all kind of meetings and participate in many kinds of activities. But if I go in a place and I see that kind of the basic building blocks aren't in place for success, then I'm probably not going to stick around there too much, because it's kind of like getting in somebody's car and you see they only got 3 wheels on the car. It's not going too far. And so why you go waste your time? So at this point, I don't have time to waste. So I try to see what things have the potential to actually accomplish what they're stating they're trying to accomplish, and I try to put my energy towards that. So I see time definitely differently for sure.
And I bring up the homies thing because one of the new projects we're working on is it's so funny. It's a step up challenge with Hope Village Revitalization. And it's about black men's cardiovascular health, but also the almost like the, I guess, social isolation, really kind of maybe even after high school or where you work, because, it's hard to like gain friends as you get older. It's not like, dudes you're going to associate, but it's not like, hey, you cool, man. You want to hang out. It's just not, it's not what brothers do. You know what I'm saying? And talking to some of the older brothers in this process has been so interesting, and like looking at the studies on it and everything. And one of the first things as I was looking at the studies was that conversation that we had about like your homies that have passed on, and what that connection is, you know?
So some of my contemporaries, because we're all going through the same thing, several of us, every week we check on each other, just call, hey, what's up? How you doing?
Yeah.
And because again, you become much more aware that this thing is short lived, and everybody's not going to be around here forever. And so, but I never been 68 years before in this lifetime, at
Yeah.
least.
Yeah.
And so, we talk a lot about children need rites of passage when they get 13, going into young manhood or young womanhood, and that's true. But we also need rites of passage at 28. We need rites of passage at 50. We need rites of passage at 68. How do I know what it's like? What I'm supposed to do as a
Right.
68-year-old man? How do I know that?
Let me ask you that. Okay, okay. Let's get there. This is why I love my Baba Malik interviews. What do you think a rites of passage at 70 looks like for brothers?
Well, I don't know exactly, but I know. Well, I do know in Africa they have age grade societies because you're in a continual process of development,
Hmm.
and in some societies you may even get different names at each point in that evolution. Now, in the wilderness of North America, what does that look like for
Yeah.
black men? I'm not sure exactly, but I know for sure that men need to know, there's physical changes that take place in your body as you get older. And, how do you know?
Hmm.
Unless somebody tells you, right? Unless you talk to people who have been through that.
Yeah.
For example, there's certain foods that I ate incessantly, like almonds. Somebody asked me once, was I on a special almond diet
Hilarious.
because I eat so many, or I ate so many almonds.
Mm.
Um, but then after you turn 50 or so, your metabolism starts to change, and eating excessive nuts can turn into fat. So maybe it was cool when you were 35 and 40, but maybe at 55, that's not the best, and that's not to say you have to stop doing it, but you have to do it
Be
differently.
more mindful about
Right,
it.
you have to moderate it. So, there's things like that. I've changed my diet. I used to eat avocados more frequently,
Hmm.
and the same thing with that. As you get older, avocado fat tends to accumulate on your body. So these are just a couple examples, but there's all kinds of changes that take place not only in your physical body, but in your relationship to the rest of the society. Like for example, whether I choose to accept it or not, my community sees me as an elder. I'm finally kind of coming to grips with that. Yes, I am an elder. Okay. I think
Hilarious.
I was trying to like run from it or fight for a while because in my mind, I still feel young.
So when was the first time somebody called you Unc?
Oh man, so not Unk, but I was on the beach in Jamaica. I was in Ocho Rios
Uh-huh.
walking down the beach with the sister I was with at the time. And as I was walking, some young brothers approached and they came up and they said, "Father, father, elder, elder." And they would, before they
Uh-huh.
addressed me, and I kind of
Yeah.
was like looking around, like, who are they
Well, who
talking
they
about?
talking to?
But and that was probably close to 30 years ago,
Yeah,
so
yeah, yeah.
but I'm accepting this, but um regardless of how you see yourself, people in
Mhm.
the community see you like that. So
Yeah,
I had people all the time calling me, trying to get my advice or trying to get me to mediate things. And I realized that this is part of what comes along with being an elder. But again, what training did I have to know that this was coming? Or even just because you're an elder doesn't know that you necessarily know how to mediate things,
yeah.
right? And um, so rites of passage can help with all of those things. Help you
That's
with
interesting.
understanding what your responsibilities are at that stage in your life. It can help you understanding about how you maintain your health better at that stage in your life. It can help you understand how you relate to things like grandchildren, which you might not have had at 30 some years old. There's your position in society changes, and so you need to change in relationship to that.
Yeah, and I would love to explore something like that with you, as I think a lot of people know that I'm probably, as people say, like, I look up to the OGs. I like the OG, my grandma street team. So oftentimes, I think um, my generation and younger can look at certain things that happened as like that was toxic, that was this, that was that, and I try to contextualize it more. Sorry, hold on. So with that, Detroit is different. Episode 1. What do you remember?
So I remember we were in Le Petit Zinc,
Yep.
and I remember, I think your mother was there,
Yep.
and also with her
Hilda Vest.
Hilda Vest. That's what I was trying to think of. Hilda Vest was there, and I remember we talked quite a bit about music, as I recall.
Yep. And
Um,
reggae in Detroit.
yeah, yeah, and that's about the extent of my memory.
Man, that was something. And the start of something that I didn't see grow like this. And messaging. What have you seen? And definitely yin and yang. So it's some beauty in the content. Not just Detroit is different, but just across the board. And some ugliness in it. Um, what impact do you think this era of content creation
Mm.
has had on our people?
So last time I was on the show, you mentioned that not only was I your first guest, but you mentioned I probably had never even heard of a podcast before I was on that podcast.
I
And
would assume many
I,
people in 2014 did not.
yeah, I think you're correct. But certainly the landscape has changed since then. I don't know if I told you this before. I probably did, but
Mhm.
I got a degree in radio and TV broadcasting at
Yeah,
Eastern Michigan University. Actually, technically, the degree is in speech. They didn't have a degree in radio and TV broadcasting.
but it would have been that.
They had a concentration in radio TV broadcasting. So it actually says speech with a concentration. But I studied, radio and TV. And so the airwaves, so to speak, and we're not exactly dealing with airwaves now, but
Yeah,
the
the
airwaves,
broadband.
yeah, has become much more democratized. So at that point in time, like 1978, I had to get a license from the FCC in order to be a radio personality. And well, actually, in order to be the engineer, you could be on the air without the license. But if you were running the board, you had to have a license from the FCC and you had to know something about engineering and the VU meters and all that kind of thing. So I've noticed that, um, it's become more democratized that you don't have to go through all that. Anybody now can have a broadcast
Yeah,
station, so to speak, and which is a double-edged sword because you got many more voices and voices that weren't previously heard, but also you got people who are on all kind of fringes and
yeah, you got that right.
so you have to you have to discern and kind of sift through a lot of the content. But the other thing I've seen is that there was certain training that people who worked in radio and TV usually had that people who are doing podcasts now may not have. And so um while it's become democratized, which is a good thing, there's also some things that, some quality control things that aren't always present on stuff like
Hilarious.
that.
And I don't know if a lot of people know this, but I do have radio television experience too. I was from Northwestern High School and Recording Institute of Detroit and WDTR. So I was in radio and I've learned how to read copy and those old school boards and reel to reel, but this is so different.
It is different. We used to cut tape with a razor blade and mark it with a grease pencil. That's how we edited back
Oof.
back in the day. It was wild.
I did video like that one time. Shout out Mr. Catula at Northwestern, but that was not anything I liked. Like you had to cut the reels and
Yeah,
it was different,
yeah, definitely.
and the barriers of entry of getting in studios were different. It
Yeah.
was so much more formalized of where things go. And I'm sure that this provides more information, but just that balance. So it's so cool that you were my first guest and we've carried on these different discussions.
I don't know if I ever told you that I have the distinction of being fired from every radio show I was ever on.
Hilarious.
Even the ones I wasn't getting paid for, we still got put off the air.
I'm sure you were probably talking about a lot of stuff that probably needed to be on a podcast at the platform at the time.
Including on WDTR.
Oh yeah, 90.9 probably definitely.
Yeah.
What were you doing?
Well, so Kwame Kenyatta had a show on there for several years, and I'm the name of it is escaping me right now. And MZ Nabawi had a show just before that. And
Okay.
so Kwame stepped down from the show, and I think he stepped down at some point. He might have been running for election or something, and he asked me to take the show over.
Yeah.
And so I assembled a team, myself, Titilayo Akanke, Abiyomi Azikiwe, Al Severs, Jendai Iyi,
Mm.
and maybe a couple other people. And we did this show every week. We produced it collectively. But we had Kalinda E on the show one day, and he said something like he thought the mayor at the time should be hung by the hung from the Joe Louis fist.
That'll probably get you kicked off the air back in the day.
And then he says something about Chaldean merchants in the city of Detroit, and they called the radio station and pressured the radio station, and so we got put off.
Oh yeah. You
But-
you can say that on Detroit is different.
But we had Marvis Cofield on the board of education at the time, and Marvis Cofield interceded and had a meeting with the management of WDTR and myself and the other producers of the show, and our show was reinstated.
Okay.
But then it was taken off the air permanently when they took all of the community programming off of WDTR.
When it switched formats.
Yes, that's right.
That's when my show was taken off as well at the
Yep,
time.
yep.
So definitely in that radio, and I know Judge Morcom had a show there with old school jazz
That's right.
and
That's right.
a lot of different stuff. Just the first iterations of editing and organizing, getting on the microphone. Quasi even wrote an article about us. We had a show called Sports in the City where we were interviewing different people after PSL sporting events, really basketball and football. That's what we focused on: girls basketball, boys basketball, and football. But that was a lot of the first iterations of experience back in 2000, 2001. So in a lot of ways, I guess behind these mics, experience goes
yeah.
over time. And I guess with that, man, as we get closer to a close, I don't know what you would like to share if you got any questions, but I do have some classic questions before
Well,
we.
I do want to share what I've been doing since June the 1st
What's
on
going
this
on?
sabbatical. And, a lot of people saying, what does that mean? You're on sabbatical, and
Yeah,
what's the difference in retirement and sabbatical and all that? So let me clarify all that up. So
thank you.
June 1st, I stepped down. I'm still technically employed by DBCFSN, although I don't have a title. I'm not, and I don't have any real responsibilities except advising the current leadership. But I'm able to still get paid for the next 6 months.
Okay.
So I had a 1-year sabbatical.
Okay.
It was paid by a family foundation out of California.
Wow.
They saw the work that I was doing. Really, the money has been in the bank for the last 4 years for me to take it. I just couldn't take it because of the development project we were doing.
Yeah.
And so ideally, you want to take a sabbatical when you're in the thick of the work, and then you come back and get more work done.
Recharged.
But I had to take it at the end of my work career once we got the building built. And so that's why I'm taking it now. So what I'm doing during the sabbatical, so I'm able to get my paycheck, so I don't have to worry about how I'm going to feed myself and pay the rent. And while I have this year, what I'm doing is resting, relaxing, researching, and writing. And so I'm writing a memoir about my life, but I understood early on as I started researching and writing this that I couldn't fully and accurately tell my life story unless I could contextualize it. What is the Detroit that I grew up in? And in fact, you videotaped the interview with my eighth grade English teacher, Melvin Peters.
That was fun.
Yeah, that was part of this process. I can't really understand myself unless I understand the people that influenced me. So I had to understand more about him. Likewise, I had to do a deep dig into the Detroit that my parents grew up in. And then going even deeper, the Detroit that their parents arrived in the 1920s. And then I had to go even deeper. And I've been spending a lot of time in Georgia. So, in fact, 2 weeks ago, I spent a week in Georgia going to various cities. I was in Atlanta, I was in LaGrange, I was in Columbus, I was in Buena Vista, I was in Ellaville, Georgia, gathering information in all those places except for LaGrange, gathering information about my family history. And so I've learned a tremendous amount about my family, both in Georgia prior to coming to Detroit, on my father's side, about my family in Arkansas, on my mother's side prior to coming to Detroit, about what happened to them once they got to Detroit, and I'm gaining a better understanding of the forces that shaped me and how I kinda turned out to be how I am and how those ancestral influences impacted that.
That's powerful. And you shared some of the clips, and that was looking so cool from Georgia and everything. And I'm looking forward to the memoir. And creatively, I can guarantee the Cardi Fraser touch will be involved in that project somehow because this is cool. And like I say, looking at Bob Malik contextualize things as you all see how he masterfully presents it. I'm very interested in where that is because so much of your story is building institutions, but the process of it, which I believe in documentation will be fruitful for our community moving forward. And I'm learning over time a lot of what you've even shared about a lot of things. Because
One of the things I'm learning while doing this research is it's significant not just because it's the story of my family, but as I talk to other people and let people read drafts, they're like, "That's the same thing that happened in my family."
over 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 my 10 years of doing Detroit is different. And I always start with um, how did your family get here? I would go as far as to say the probability of a black family getting to Detroit anywhere from the 20s, 30s, or 40s and being from Georgia or Alabama, I would say it's probably maybe a 67 to 75% chance.
Yeah,
Those two places.
yeah.
And some of that I think is the railroad lines. I think some of that also is the fact that they were up here and they were coming, and hence, like, even those same patterns of migration of, like I say, those Mississippi, a lot of the Mississippi, Arkansas, they're gonna be in St. Louis and Chicago. Further east, they're gonna be in Cleveland, Pittsburgh, New York, New Jersey, and things like that. But Alabama and
Georgia.
Georgia, but Detroit, I would go as far as to say that was Black Bottom.
Yeah. So again, it's significant because it's a story of my family, but it's a broader significance because it's our
Yeah.
collective story.
Very much
And the
so.
specifics might be different in your family, my family, but the general narrative is the same. And so
Yeah.
it has broad significance beyond just my family.
Yeah, when you were looking at where people that have been here in the studio, this is a home. My grandfather, John William Brown, one of those few World War II vets that did get a GI Bill, lost a leg in World War II. Um, and he had the upholstery shop you were talking about, but he Thomasville, Georgia,
Oh, okay. I've
so
heard of it. I'm not sure exactly where it is, but I've
oh
heard of it.
man, it's
It's
country
it's
country town.
it's
This
so
one
many
is
small towns. So where my
yeah.
grandfather was born in Ellaville, they had maybe 1,500 people in the town.
Mhm. One
And
of them, you get buried with a gold tooth, as they say. That's
yeah,
why he had a couple.
you can be in and out of town really in 5 minutes. If you stay on the on the road coming into it, and you keep driving 5 minutes, you'll be out.
Yep.
And so there's a lot of those little towns like that in Georgia. And I will say this also, being on a lot of back roads in Georgia 3 weeks ago, I saw a bunch of Trump signs.
I was gonna say, I'm sure you saw a lot of "Make America Great Again."
Yeah, I saw a lot of that, a lot of that.
Oh,
So,
I'm sure.
you get back there in the backwoods and
Yeah. Atlanta. Atlanta is Atlanta,
Like
but
Detroit,
Georgia,
like Detroit is Detroit, right?
yes.
Detroit ain't Michigan.
No, 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 no,
Don't
no,
get it
no.
twisted.
No, you'll fly into Atlanta International and you'll be thinking, oh, it's nothing but black people. But
Right.
then you go a couple miles out of Metro,
Yep.
you in Georgia.
That's right.
You definitely in one of them. You better have AAA if a tire bust.
Interestingly, as I got to Buena Vista, Georgia, I was driving from Columbus to Buena Vista, and I was driving from Columbus to Ellaville, but you had to pass through Buena Vista to get to Ellaville.
Yep.
And Ellaville is where my father's father was born. But then when he was 2 years old, his mother died, and his father moved to Buena Vista, 15 miles away, where he grew up. So
Mhm.
anyway, as I'm driving down the highway from Columbus, and I get to Buena Vista, and there's a sign on the side of the highway, "Welcome to Buena Vista." So I get out. Well, I'm getting ready to get out. I parked on the shoulder, was getting my camera together, my phone, to go take a picture of the sign. And my floor mat was a little out of sync, and so I adjusted that before I got out the car. I was kind of bent down adjusting it, and when I looked up in my rearview mirror, the police were behind me.
You got that right.
So I hadn't been there 30 seconds, and it was kind of like, "Welcome, right? We know
got
you
that
here."
right.
And so I got out of the car and went over to the dude, and I said, "Hey, how you doing? I'm from out of town. My grandfather's from here. I'm just, taking a picture." And but it was like clear, we know you here.
Yeah.
I mean, as soon as I hit the line, right?
Mhm.
But I mean, he was cool. It wasn't no
Yeah,
antagonism,
yeah.
and it was cool. And then where I was going, actually, to the Ellaville County seat is right next to the sheriff's department. So when I got to where I was going, his car was parked right across the street. So I know they had eyes on me the whole time I was there.
You got that right. You got that right. Similar to that fight night, which I like that fight night piece on Hulu, where they have the Muhammad Ali getting taken out of Georgia from that. But all fun, always. Thank you,
Sir.
Baba Malik.
Thank you, Kyrie. Appreciate it.
Always. Peace.
Peace.
Detroit is Different is where you get information, artistry, history, music, and even comedy. Detroit is Different, a home for the culture of Detroit. Visit online at DetroitisDifferent.com today.